Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison's Select Reserve.
I want to talk about you, who you are, where you come from, what has shaped you.
Right. Who am I? That's already known. I'm Thuli Madonsela, born in Johannesburg, brought up in Soweto, but between Soweto and Swaziland. A lot of my education was acquired in Swaziland. So my formative years were spent between here and Swaziland.
What would you say were the most important issues that formed part of who you are today?
I believe that what shaped my generation is living under apartheid and seeing the gross injustices that our parents and relatives suffered. For me, it would be the past laws and how they were brutally enforced, with people knocking at night and people trying to hide and still getting arrested. My father was a trader, an informal trader. And at that stage, it was difficult to get a license, and at the same time, you still got arrested for not having it. And he had to fight his own battles. I think I had a lot of respect for my father, though, because he was uneducated, but he would still handle these things in court without legal representation. My mother herself had a lot of influence in the way I see things. Both my parents were very spiritual. And my mother had also the caring side to her. She valued education, but also she was always like the place where people who need help come there. Whether they need somebody to speak on their behalf somewhere, or they need somebody to resolve a dispute between them, it will always somehow land at our house. Or even if they needed just food or a place to sleep, they would always land at her house. Yeah. That was before crime, I suppose, became a problem.
Indeed.
Yes.
Now, that's inside the home. Outside the home, of course, many of us who grew up during that period, and
yes.
I see you grew up the same period, I think, that I grew up, would obviously talk about the influences of people like Nelson Mandela, how a man not quite abdicates, but takes a decision to say, I will forego the comforts and fight for the nation. Who, outside of those big names, would you say helped shape you who you are the most?
Actually, I would say Nelson Mandela himself was one of those people that shaped my outlook. I remember when I was at university, I actually had his picture somewhere on the wall. And I got A Long Walk to Freedom, that small yellowish one book, during my student days. So people like him did shape me. But at a physical contact level, one of the people who had an indelible mark on my development as a human being was Mama Albertina Sisulu, who I met early in the 80s. Very quiet confidence, very dignified, very graceful, but sharp and visionary in her approach to life. And I think she was one of those people that shaped me. But during those years, there are various other people working in the trade union movement shaped also my outlook and the sense of justice. I got involved in the trade union movement in the 80s when these unions were still struggling, when COSATU had not yet been formed, and then it was formed as I was participating on a part-time basis. Yeah. I worked also in the civics. So it was really student politics. It was various things that came together and made me the kind of human being that I've ended up being.
Yeah. What would you say are the major milestones that you've seen in your life to date?
For me, okay, one of the milestones would obviously be participating in the trade union movement and playing a small role in the negotiations that led to the formation of COSATU. The second one would be having the privilege of being one of the drafters of the Constitution. I was one of the 11 constitutional experts that did the preliminary drafting and then for the Constitutional Assembly to refine. I also have been fortunate to get involved in the drafting of various pieces of legislation, from the Local Government Transition Act very early in the 90s, the Equality Act. I was very instrumental in drafting the Equality Act, including the Equality Courts. And then, but the other acts that I was involved in.
Would you say that was
is
your most important achievement, even up to now? The Equality Act?
I think from the field of legislation, I would say yes, the Equality Act was one of those key milestones. But when I came to the Law Reform Commission, one of my most enjoyable moments, whether you would call it a milestone or not, but it was leading the project that was called Project 25, which was a project of a statutory review project, reviewing all legislation in our statute book to look at alignment of that legislation with the Constitution, particularly focusing on removing discriminatory provisions from all pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
That was one of those areas
that must have been quite extensive work.
It was. Really, there's been a lot. I think I've been fortunate getting involved in the transformation of the justice system. Working with Minister Dala Oma was one of the most rewarding moments of my life. Looking at all aspects of the justice system, not just changing the law, but changing the outlook, integrating the ethic of care, the whole question of human dignity in that system.
Yeah.
And that resulted in a vision document that we call Justice Vision 2000. It's very difficult for me to say which of those footsteps major to other person, but I would only say personally what gave me joy, it would be obviously being involved in the drafting of the Constitution, because that is something that you get once in your lifetime.
Yeah, and the major work that you've done to date on the Constitution, would you now say our law is perfect?
Our law is not perfect, but we have a progressive framework by any global standards. I think the Constitution that we have was very visionary in nature. In fact, some people often feel that the Constitution was far too advanced for our society. But it has become then the vision that drives us as a nation. It's become the one thing that tells us that where we are is not good enough.
Yeah.
We have a journey to
But you see, that's
traverse.
an interesting observation, because it raises the issue of sustainability. If we cannot sustain, if you like, the Constitution, in other words, believe in it as a whole, then the Constitution itself is under threat. Just like your office.
Yes.
If your office is way too ahead of the time and people don't believe in it, then those with vested interests will attack its very foundations. And we may be sacrificing your office and the Constitution.
That's true. I want to believe, though, that even the most conservative of constitutions can be attacked when people have their own personal interests that have nothing to do with public interest. Look at various African constitutions. I'm talking the pre-90 constitutions. They were the post-colonial constitutions, fairly basic, but people attacked them. So I think our Constitution, yes, you're right, it's visionary. But for me, I see it as a beacon of hope. In fact, I always say that when all else fails, we just have to keep this Constitution as it is, because it becomes at least a standard on which we judge ourselves as a society. But it also gives us that hope that where do we need to go as a society? Remembering what broke the night into day after the, post-apartheid, it was that Constitution. So that's really our bridge to the future. I do believe that there'll always be people that say there's a problem with the law when there's nothing wrong with the law. If I look at the way what my office does at the moment, in terms of service delivery, there isn't enough. There isn't any opposition to the work that I do.
Sure.
There's very little opposition. Everyone knows that when there's service failure, when people complain, there has to be remedial action if indeed that they suffered an injustice. We get resistance where we are saying a particular person did not act in accordance with the law and in accordance with the policies of the very same government. But I think that's not a problem of the Constitution. That's a problem of people being selfish.
People have a problem of understanding.
Well, some of it is actually not that they don't understand. They know that their action was unlawful. They know that they have certain responsibilities in terms of looking after state resources. For as long as I've been here in government, I have known that there's certain standards around wasteful expenditure. You're not
Sure.
supposed to waste resources. You're not supposed to abuse power. You're not supposed to use public resources to benefit yourself or to benefit those that are close to you.
Let's talk about the future.
Yes.
Your next milestones. What are they? I'm hoping you can give us, say, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5.
I think the key thing that I've wanted for this office is, number one, to reach all South Africans who need to know about the office, so that people can come to this office with their problems as early as possible as they can, and so that they can be assisted. The second thing that I would like to achieve is an improvement in the quality of my investigators, to make sure that we sharpen our teeth and that we improve the rigor of our investigations and the speed of our investigations. And as a result, I have requested a colleague from Canada to come and train, which is happening in August. The last milestone is really to make sure that government trusts the office as well, because it's important that government also understands that we're on the same side. Government wants development.
Sure.
Government wants service delivery. Government wants to be returned, or at least the current administration would like to be returned to office in 5 years' time. What we are doing is helping government to achieve those same objectives. If we can achieve that, then we would have really achieved our role of strengthening constitutional democracy. Lastly, I would like a situation where people never see a reason to go toy in the street, to
Sure.
burn a library or to burn something. They have to trust these institutions of state, knowing that these institutions will take their case and correct whatever injustice that has happened without fear or favor.
Yeah. And what would you like to see as your lasting legacy? What would you like to leave the South African people when you leave your office?
The lasting legacy is really justice, a sense of administrative justice from this office. It's two things really. One is justice for people that have been wronged. The other one is really clawing back resources, public resources that have been abused through either wasteful expenditure or through corrupt practices. I really think that that is important, not just for me, for government, because we're losing millions of rands that are not just needed by the people, but they're needed by those in power to make sure that there is a school in the rural areas that has all the scientific equipment that a child needs. So if my office can make a contribution in two ways, one in terms of administrative justice for the common person, and on the other hand, accountability for resources and clawing back resources so that they can be channeled towards development, I would have lived a good life.
Advocate Thuli Madonsela, I'm hoping we shall be here to document that progress and those difficulties.